Jack stood on the edge of the forest, staring out at the distant horizon. The sun was just beginning to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. It was supposed to be a peaceful day, one where he could relax and gather his thoughts. But something felt different today. He'd been in space for so long, traveling from one planet to the next, fighting in wars, and doing things most people would never imagine. But none of that had prepared him for what he was about to face. The sound of footsteps caught his attention. At first, he thought it was just the wind, or maybe one of the crew members coming to check on him. But when he turned, he saw Haran, alien woman walking slowly toward him. She was tall, with dark shimmering skin that seemed to glisten in the fading light. Her hair, long and flowing, moved as though it had a life of its own, swaying with each step. What struck Jack the most, however, were her eyes. They were large and almond-shaped, glowing softly in the dimming light. But there was something in them, a sadness, a pain that Jack couldn't understand. Jack had encountered many different species during his time in the galaxy, but nothing. Like her presence was unlike anything he had ever experienced. She didn't look like she was a warrior, or a diplomat, or someone with an agenda. She looked like someone who had lost everything. As she approached, Jack's mind raced. She dangerous? Was she here to attack? Is this some kind of trap? But when their eyes met, all those thoughts seemed to vanish. He saw the tears in her eyes. She wasn't here to fight or cause harm. She was here to ask for help. The realization hit him hard, but before he could say anything, she spoke. "I've been looking for you," she said softly, her voice trembling. Her accent was strange, but clear enough for him to understand. "You are the one who can save us." Jack froze, unsure of what to say. He had no idea who this woman was, or why she thought he could help her. "I'm sorry, I don't know who." "You are," he said cautiously, his hand hovering near the weapon at his side. "How do you know about me?" The woman took another step forward, wiping her tears away with the back of her hand. "I know who you are. Your people," she began. "I have seen you in my dreams. I was told I would find you," her words confused Jack even more. What could this alien woman mean by finding him in her dreams? He had never met anyone like her before. The idea that she had seen him in her dreams only added to the mystery. Could she be mistaken? Was she part of a religious group, or was this some kind of prophecy she believed in? "Look, I don't know what you're talking about," Jack said, trying to remain calm. "I'm just a soldier, not anyone special." But the woman shook her head. "You are more than just a soldier," she said. "You are the one who will help my people." Jack took a deep breath. He had seen many strange things in his time, alien races, futuristic technology, and battles that had tested his limits. But this was something different. He was used to dealing with threats, not with someone asking for help in such a strange and desperate way. "Who are you, and what's going on?" The woman hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "Name is Amara," she said. "I am from the planet Zalora. My people are in danger. We are scattered across the galaxy, fighting to survive after our world was destroyed. We were once allies with your people, but that was long ago, and we are on the brink of extinction." Jack's eyes widened. He had heard of Zalora, but he didn't know much about the planet or its people. All he knew was that they were one of the many alien species that humanity had encountered in the past, but he never imagined they were in such a dire situation. "Why me?" Jack asked. "Why do you think I can help?" Mara looked at him with a mixture of hope and sadness in her eyes. "Because I was told that one day a human would come, human who could lead us to safety, and that human is you." Jack didn't know what to say. He had never asked for any of this. He didn't want to be the savior of anyone. All he wanted was to finish his mission and go home. But Amara's words echoed in his mind, and he couldn't ignore the desperation in her eyes. "Don't know what I can do for you," Jack said quietly. "I'm just a soldier, like I said. But if you're telling the truth, and if your people really need help, I'll do whatever I can." Amara nodded, her eyes filled with both relief and gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "You don't know how much this means to me? To us." Jack didn't know what he had just agreed to, but something told him that this was only the beginning of a much larger journey. a journey that would change everything he thought he knew about the galaxy. But for now, all he could do was follow her, wherever she might lead him. As they walked side by side, Jack couldn't help but wonder what had happened to Amara's people, what had destroyed their planet, and why had she been searching for him. There were too many questions, and no answers yet. But one thing was clear. Jack was in this now. Whether he liked it or not, as Jack and Amara walked through the forest, the world around them seemed to grow quieter, the only sounds being their footsteps crunching through the leaves. Amara led him to a small clearing where a camp had been set up. It was basic, with a few tents and some equipment scattered around. Jack couldn't help but notice the small group of alien beings gathered around a fire. They looked tired, worn out, and each one had a look of uncertainty in their eyes. There was no doubt in Jack's mind. Now Amara wasn't lying. These were survivors, and they needed help. Amara glanced over her shoulder, making sure Jack was following her. She stopped in front of a large tent, its fabric worn but sturdy. "This is where we'll talk," she said, her voice still soft but with a touch of urgency. Jack nodded and followed her inside. Inside the tent was a map of sorts, laid out on a table. It was a mix of symbols and alien language that Jack didn't recognize. Amara pointed to the map, and Jack leaned in closer to get a better look. "This is the galaxy," Amara explained, tracing her fingers over the map. "Zalora was here," she said, pointing to a distant star system. "We were a peaceful people living in harmony with many of the species you know. But then the war came. The galaxy was thrown into chaos, and now our world is gone." Jack felt a knot form in his stomach. He had heard about the wars that had torn apart many peaceful species. But hearing it from someone who had lost everything made it feel real. "So what happened to your planet?" he asked, his voice steady, though his heart ached for her. Amara's eyes became distant as she spoke, her voice almost a whisper. "The war destroyed Zalora. Our enemies attacked without warning, without mercy. We were left with nothing: our cities, our homes, our families, all gone. Now we are scattered across the galaxy, hiding from the same forces that destroyed us." Jack could see the pain in her eyes, the way her hands trembled as she spoke. But there was something else there, too, a deep resolve. "You don't give up easily, do you?" he asked, his voice soft. She met his gaze, a small smile forming on her lips. "No, I can't. I can't give up on my people." Jack respected that. He knew what it was like to fight for something that mattered. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. Amara turned back to the map, her finger moving to a nearby star system. "We need a safe place, a new home. We've heard rumors of a planet that might be suitable, but it's in a dangerous part of the galaxy, controlled by enemies who would destroy us on sight." Jack frowned. "And you think we can get there, with all these people?" Amara nodded. "I know it's risky, but it's our only chance. The Zalora are a strong people, but we need a leader. Someone who can guide us through the dangers we face." Jack stood there, taking it all in. He had never considered himself a leader. He was just a soldier trained to fight, not to lead. But looking at Amara and her people, he realized that he couldn't turn his back on them. They had lost everything, and now they were putting their trust in him. "I'll help," Jack said, his voice firm. "But I need to know more about these enemies. How are we supposed to fight them?" Amara looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. "We have no army. We have no weapons. All we have is our will to survive. We need someone who can lead us, someone who knows how to fight." "Hey, that's where you come in." Jack nodded slowly. He had seen the chaos that war could bring, but he had also seen the hope that could come from a well-led battle. He couldn't deny that he felt a sense of responsibility to these people. "All right, I'll do what I can. But we'll need more than just willpower. We'll need supplies, allies, and a plan." Amara smiled, her eyes lighting up for the first time since Jack had met her. "We can do that. We have a few contacts in the galaxy who might be able to help us. We'll need to move quickly before our enemies find us." Jack couldn't help but admire her determination. She was a warrior, just like him, someone who had seen the worst the galaxy had to offer, but still believed in the possibility of hope. And for some reason, Jack believed in it too. As the night fell and the stars lit up the sky, Jack sat by the fire with Amara and the other survivors. They were quiet at first, but as the evening wore on, they began to share stories. Joe listened, hearing about the lives they had lost, the families they had been forced to leave behind. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Jack could see the weight of it in their eyes. One of the survivors, a tall alien with blue skin and a gentle voice, turned to Jack. "You don't have to do this," the alien said. "You've already helped us by coming here. You've given us hope." Jack shook his head. "I didn't come here to give hope. I came because I think we can do this. We can find a new home, and we can build something better. But we can't do it alone." Amara placed a hand on Jack's shoulder, and he turned to her. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You don't know how much this means to us, to me." Met her gaze, and for the first time, he truly understood the weight of her words. It wasn't just about saving a people, it was about giving them a future. And Jack was going to help them fight for that future, no matter what it took. The night passed slowly, filled with quiet conversations and plans for the journey ahead. Jack knew that there were many dangers waiting for them. But with Amara by his side and the strength of the Zalora people, Jack was ready to face whatever came next. The journey would be long and difficult, but it was one that could change the galaxy forever. The next few days passed in a blur. Jack was no longer just a soldier. He was the leader of something far greater than himself. As Amara had explained, the journey ahead would be dangerous, and they needed to be prepared for everything. They had little time to waste, so they began planning their next steps carefully. Amara had already reached out to her contacts across the galaxy, and Jack's job was to prepare the Zalora survivors for what was to come. Amara and Jack spent long hours in the tent, discussing strategies and resources. They talked about finding weapons, securing a safe route to the new planet, and building a network of allies who could help them along the way. The task ahead seemed impossible, but every time Jack looked at Amara, he saw the fire in her eyes, and it made him believe that they could do it. In the mornings, Jack trained with the Zalora survivors. He taught them basic combat skills, how to defend themselves, how to move together as a unit, and how to use whatever weapons they could find. Most of the Zalora were not fighters by nature. They were peaceful people who had never known the horrors of war. But Jack knew that they would need to be ready, couldn't afford to let them be vulnerable. It was during one of these training sessions that Jack saw a change in Amara. She had always been strong and determined, but now there was something more. She was no longer just the woman with the burden of her people's survival on her shoulders. She had become a leader in her own right. She joined the training sessions, not as a student, but as a guide, helping Jack teach the others. Her presence inspired them. They saw her strength, her resilience, and they followed her example. One morning, as they practiced with makeshift weapons, a young Zalora named Zoran approached Jack. He was tall, with dark green skin and bright yellow eyes. He looked nervous, hesitant, but there was a determination in his eyes that Jack had come to recognize in the others. "Jack," Zoran said softly, his voice almost lost in the noise of the training session. "I want to learn, want to help. Protect my people." Jack nodded, lowering his weapon. "You're already doing your part by being here, but if you want to learn, I'll teach you." Zoran smiled, grateful for Jack's words. As Jack began to show him the basics of hand-to-hand combat, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. These people were not soldiers, but they were willing to learn, to fight for a future that seemed so uncertain. Jack knew that if they were going to survive, they would need each other more than ever. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the survivors gathered around the fire. The air was cool, and the stars were beginning to shine brightly overhead. Amara sat beside Jack, looking out at the small group of Zalora who had gathered around the fire. They were quiet, lost in their thoughts, but Jack could see the change in them. They were no longer just refugees, they were fighters. Amara turned to Jack, her eyes full of a quiet gratitude. "You've done more for us than you know," she said softly. "In just a few days, You've turned us from a broken group of survivors into a force. We're no longer just running away. We're fighting for our future." Jack felt a lump form in his throat. He wasn't used to receiving praise. He was just doing what he thought was right. "It's not just me," he said. "It's all of us. You've been the one showing them what it means to stand strong, to fight for something greater than ourselves." Amara smiled, her face softening. "I had to, but I couldn't have done it without you. You believed in us when no one else would. That means everything." Jack looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. He hadn't come here to become a hero. He hadn't come to save anyone. But now he realized that his journey was far from over. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about helping these people find their place in the galaxy, helping them build a future. The next day, Amara's contact finally replied. The message was brief but hopeful. They had found a safe route to the new planet. But there was one problem. The enemy forces controlled a key part of that route. If they wanted to make it, they would have to go through enemy territory. It was a risk, but it was the only option they had. Jack gathered the survivors together, and Amara stood beside him, looking at each person as if she was memorizing their faces. "This is it," she said, her voice steady. "We don't know what's waiting for us, but we can't turn back. We have to move forward together. We'll face the enemy, and we will fight for our future." The group murmured in agreement, their faces set with determination. Jack could see the resolve in their eyes. These weren't just people trying to survive. They were warriors now. They would do whatever it took to find a new home. The journey to the enemy-controlled sector began the next morning. Jack and Amara led the group, moving carefully through the galaxy's dangerous regions. They kept to the shadows, avoiding enemy patrols, but Jack knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. Sooner or later, they would be discovered. As they moved closer to their destination, the tension in the air grew thicker. Every sound felt amplified. Every step seemed to echo in the quiet darkness. But Jack didn't let fear take over. He focused on the task ahead, on getting these people to safety. They were depending on him, and he couldn't afford to let them down. Finally, after days of traveling in silence, they reached the outskirts of the enemy's territory. Jack could see the enemy ships in the distance, patrolling the area. The group had to be careful. One wrong move, and they would be discovered. But Jack had faith in them. He knew they could do it. They had come so far already. They wouldn't stop now. As Amara turned to Jack, their eyes met for a brief moment. In that silence, they didn't need words. They both understood what was at stake. Together, they would lead their people to safety. Nothing, not even the enemy forces, would stand in their way. The journey through enemy territory was more dangerous than Jack had ever imagined. Every movement had to be calculated, every decision made with the utmost caution. The enemy had eyes everywhere, drones patrolling the skies, and ships moving silently through the shadows of space. Jack and the survivors kept to the cover of the stars, using the darkness as their shield. But the closer they got to the enemy's stronghold, the more they felt the weight of the danger pressing in on them. It was late at night, and the group had stopped to rest in a secluded area on an uncharted moon. The survivors were exhausted, their bodies weary from the long journey, but their spirits were high. They had made it this far, and they knew that they couldn't afford to stop now. Jack stood watch as the others slept, his eyes scanning the dark horizon. Amara sat beside him, her eyes reflecting the faint glow of the stars above. "We're getting closer," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack nodded. "I know, but it doesn't make it any easier." Amara turned to face him. "You're afraid?" Jack met her gaze. "I'm not afraid," he replied. "Just realistic. We've made it this far, but there's still a long way to go. Can't afford to make mistakes." She smiled softly, her face bathed in the dim light of the stars. "You're more like us than you think, Jack. You carry the weight of your people, just as I carry mine." Jack didn't know what to say to that. Had always thought of himself as a soldier, trained for battle, but in this moment, standing side by side with Amara and her people, he realized how much he had changed. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a leader. And more than that, he was a part of something much bigger than himself. "You've done more for us than you know," Amara continued, her voice soft but steady. We were lost, scattered. Across the galaxy, but now we have a chance to rebuild. You gave us that chance. Jack shook his head. It's not just me. You're the one leading them. You're the one giving them hope. Amara looked down at her hands. It's not always easy, Jack. Sometimes I feel like I'm carrying the weight of the galaxy on my shoulders. But when I look at you, when I see how far we've come, I know we can do this. We can find a new home, and we can make sure that no one else suffers the way we did. Jack could see the determination in her eyes, the strength that she had fought to hold on to for so long. It was that strength that had brought them this far, and it was that strength that would carry them through the hardest parts of the journey. The next day, they moved out again. The path ahead was clear, but they knew that the closer they got to the enemy's stronghold, the more difficult it would become. As they moved forward, Jack could feel the tension rising in the air. The survivors were on edge, and Jack couldn't blame them. They had no idea what awaited them at the enemy's gates. It wasn't long before they encountered their first obstacle. A group of enemy ships appeared in the distance, their dark silhouettes outlined against the stars. Watch! Jack's heart raced. As he signaled for the group to stop, they had to hide and fast. Amara quickly made her way to Jack's side, her face serious. What do we do? We hide, Jack said, his voice calm despite the rush of adrenaline. We can't risk being seen. We'll wait for them to pass. The survivors quickly scattered, seeking shelter in the nearby craters and caves. Jack and Amara remained behind, watching as the enemy ships drew closer. It was a tense few minutes as the ships passed, their engines humming softly in the night. Jack could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. He could see the same nervous energy in Amara's eyes. When the last of the ships had passed, Jack let out a long breath, his body relaxing for the first time in what felt like hours. That was too close, he said. Amara nodded. Can't keep doing this forever. We need to find a way to fight back. Jack's mind raced. He knew they couldn't keep running from the enemy. Sooner or later they would catch up to them. They needed a plan, and they needed it fast. But for now, they would keep moving forward. The enemy may have the power to control the stars, but they didn't have the will to stop what was coming. As the days passed, Jack and Amara continued to lead the survivors through enemy territory. The tension never eased, but they managed to stay one step ahead. Jack's mind was constantly racing, thinking of ways they could get to their destination without being caught. But each day, the danger grew more real, more pressing. They couldn't keep hiding forever. Then, on the 5th day, they reached the enemy stronghold. The area was heavily fortified, with towering walls and high-tech defense systems. Jack could feel his heart race as they approached the edge of the stronghold's defenses. This was it. The final stretch of their journey. Amara turned to him, her face set with determination. We're close, Jack. We can't turn back now. Jack looked around at the group of survivors who were standing in silence behind them. They were tired, hungry, and afraid. But they were also determined, and that was what mattered. Jack knew that this was the moment they had all been waiting for. They had made it this far, and they weren't going to stop now. We won't turn back, Jack said, his voice steady. We'll fight. Together. The group stood in silence for a moment, the weight of what lay ahead hanging heavy in the air. But then, one by one, they nodded, ready to face whatever came next. As Jack and Amara led the survivors forward, the enemy's defenses loomed ahead of them. It was time to make their stand. And Jack knew that whatever happened, they would face it together. The stronghold loomed ahead, a massive structure of metal and stone, surrounded by high walls and armed with the latest defenses. Jack and the survivors had reached the enemy's territory, but they were not backing down. They had come too far, and now there was no turning back. The first step was getting past the outer defenses. The enemy patrols were constant scanning the area for any signs of movement. Jack knew they couldn't afford to be spotted. Survivors were tired, their bodies aching from the long journey, but their spirits were high. They had made it this far, and now they were ready to face whatever lay ahead. We need to move quickly, Jack said, his voice low but urgent. Stay close, and don't make a sound. Amara, standing beside him, nodded. "We can do this," she said, her voice calm and steady. Despite the danger, there was a sense of peace in her that Jack couldn't help but admire. She had been through so much, yet she remained strong. It was that strength that had brought them all this far. The group moved quickly, staying in the shadows and using the natural cover of the terrain to hide from the enemy patrols. They had to be careful one wrong move, and they could be discovered. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as they crept closer to the heart of the stronghold. He could hear the faint hum of enemy machines, the distant sounds of guards talking, and the occasional buzz of a drone flying overhead. But they kept moving, their steps light and deliberate. They couldn't stop now. After what felt like hours, they reached a small, hidden entrance at the base of the stronghold. Jack checked the area, ensuring no guards were nearby, before signaling for the group to enter. The door creaked as it opened, but they managed to slip inside without being heard. Inside, the stronghold was a maze of corridors and rooms, each one filled with technology that Jack didn't understand. It was clear that the enemy was well prepared, but Jack wasn't afraid. He had trained for situations like this, had fought in countless battles, faced down enemies with more firepower than he cared to count, but there was something different about this fight. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about protecting people who had lost everything. "We need to find a way to disable the security systems," Jack said, looking at Amara. "We can't keep sneaking around forever." Amara nodded. "I know where the control room is. Follow me." They moved through the corridors, staying alert for any signs of enemy activity. The tension was thick in the air, and Jack's senses were on high alert. He could hear the faint hum of machinery, the distant sounds of footsteps, yet nothing close enough to pose a threat. Yet finally they reached a large reinforced door. Amara stepped forward, pressing her hand against the panel next to it. A few moments later, the door slid open with a soft hiss inside. The control room was filled with consoles and screens, each one displaying real-time data on the enemy's movements. Jack quickly surveyed the room, spotting the central terminal. That controlled the security systems. He moved toward it, his fingers already working over the controls. Amara watched him closely, eyes filled with a mix of admiration and hope. "Can you do it?" she asked. Jack didn't look up as he worked. "I can," he said confidently, "but we don't have much time." He connected his communicator to the terminal, bypassing the encryption with ease. It wasn't long before the system began to glitch, and Jack knew he had access. He disabled the security cameras and locked the doors to the main entrance, giving them some breathing room. "There," Jack said, stepping back. "That should buy us some time." Amara looked at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You really are something, Jack," he shrugged, trying not to let the praise get to him. "We're not out of the woods yet. We still need to find the others." The group moved through the corridors once again, now with a sense of urgency. They had to find the rest of the survivors, and they had to do it quickly. Every second counted. As they passed through a hallway, they heard a faint sound, a soft scraping noise, like something moving in the dark. Jack raised his hand, signaling for everyone to stop. The sound was closer now, and Jack could see the shadows moving. "Stay quiet," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The group pressed against the wall, holding their breath. Jack's mind raced, trying to figure out what was coming there. The enemy patrols had been tight, but this felt different. A figure emerged from the shadows, moving silently toward them. It was one of the Xylora survivors, Zoran, the young alien who had shown so much determination in the past few days. He looked frightened, his eyes wide with fear. "Zoran?" Jack whispered, his voice full of concern. Zoran froze, his gaze locking. "On, Jack. The enemy is getting closer," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We need to move now. They've found us." Without waiting for a response, Zoran turned and began running down the hallway. Jack didn't hesitate. He signaled for the others to follow, and the group sprinted after him. As they turned a corner, Jack could hear the sounds of footsteps echoing behind them. The enemy had found them, and they were closing in fast. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he pushed the survivors forward, his eyes scanning for any signs of escape. Up ahead, he spotted a maintenance hatch, a small door that led to the lower levels of the stronghold. It wasn't ideal, but it was their best chance. "Over there," Jack shouted, pointing to the hatch. "Move." The group ran for the hatch, with the sounds of enemy footsteps growing louder by the second. They reached the hatch just as the first enemy soldiers rounded the corner. Jack and Amara worked quickly, opening the door and ushering everyone inside. The hatch closed with a soft thud, and the group was plunged into darkness. They paused, catching their breath. The sounds of pursuit were now muffled, but Jack knew they weren't safe yet. They still had a long way to go before they reached the safety of the new planet. "We keep moving," Jack said, his voice firm. "We've come too far to stop now." Mara nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "Let's go." The survivors were ready. They had been through so much, but they had not given up. And as they descended into the depths of the stronghold, Jack knew that together they would face whatever came next. This was just the beginning, and they had a future to fight for. The dark tunnels beneath the enemy stronghold were cold and silent. Jack could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. They had barely escaped the patrol, and now, as they made their way through the lower levels of the stronghold, every step felt like it could be their last. The hatch had closed behind them with a soft thud, but the sounds of the enemy's pursuit were still fresh in his mind. The survivors had taken refuge in the maze of maintenance tunnels. Hoping to regroup and find a way to continue their journey, Jack led the group down a narrow corridor, the air stale and thick with tension. Amara walked beside him, her expression calm but determined. She had been through so much, yet her resolve had never wavered. Jack couldn't help but admire her strength, but even he could feel the growing uncertainty in the air. The journey was far from over. "How much further?" Jack asked, glancing over at Amara. "We're close," she replied, her voice steady. "There's a maintenance room ahead. From there, we can access the lower levels, and it will take us to the outer perimeter. But we have to move quickly." Jack nodded. He could feel the urgency in Amara's words, and he didn't need to ask. Twice they had to get to the outer perimeter and find a way to escape. Time was running out. As they continued down the dimly lit hallway, Jack's thoughts raced. Every minute they spent in the stronghold brought them closer to being discovered. The enemy would not stop searching until they were found. And Jack knew that if they didn't act soon, they would be trapped. "We can't keep running," Jack said, his voice low but firm. "We need to make a stand." Amara looked at him, a hint of surprise in her eyes. "What do you mean?" Jack said, "We can't keep hiding in these tunnels. If we do, they'll eventually find us. We need to take the fight to them." Mara hesitated for a moment, considering Jack's words. She looked around at the survivors, their faces filled with uncertainty. They had come so far, but the fear in their eyes told Jack everything he needed to know. They were ready to fight, but they needed direction. "We have to do this," Jack said, his voice more determined now. "We've come this far together, and we can't let them stop us. We'll make our stand here, and we'll fight for our future." Amara nodded, her eyes meeting Jack's. "All right, let's do this." They reached the maintenance room, and Jack pushed open the door with a soft creak. Inside, there were shelves filled with tools and supplies, but the room was otherwise empty. Jack scanned the area, looking for anything that could help them in the coming battle. "We don't have much," Jack said, surveying the room, "but we'll make do with what we've got." Amara moved toward a control panel on the far side of the room and began working on it. "I can disable the security systems here," she said, her fingers moving quickly over the console. "Will give us some breathing room, but we still need to find a way to get to the outer perimeter." Nodded, watching as Amara worked. The survivors were quiet now, waiting for their next move. Jack could feel the weight of their eyes on him, and he knew that the next decision would be crucial. They were counting on him. A loud beep interrupted his thoughts, and Amara looked up from the console. "I've disabled the security cameras and locked down the outer gates," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "We have about 10 minutes. Before they realize something's wrong, we need to move now." Jack didn't hesitate. "Let's go." They moved quickly, making their way through the narrow corridors and up to a maintenance lift that would take them to the outer perimeter. The elevator ride felt like an eternity, the tension in the air thick and heavy. Jack could hear his own breath, steady but quick, and he could see the same look of determination on the faces of the survivors. When the lift finally came to a stop, they found themselves on the edge of the enemy's stronghold, looking out over the barren landscape. The planet was dark, its surface scarred by the war that had torn through it. Jack could see the distant outline of enemy ships patrolling the area, their dark shapes moving silently in the night. "We're almost there," Amara said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty. "We just need to make it past the outer gates." Jack looked out over the landscape, his mind working quickly. The enemy was closing in on them, and they didn't have much time. But he knew that if they were going to make it, they needed to act fast. "We don't have the luxury of time," Jack said. "We'll make a run for it. Stay close and move quickly." The survivors nodded, their faces filled with a mix of fear and determination. Jack could see the fear in their eyes, but he could also see the courage. They were ready to fight. They moved out into the open, their footsteps quiet but hurried. The sound of enemy ships grew louder, and Jack's heart raced as he led the group across the barren landscape. They were getting closer to the outer gates. But the enemy ships were drawing nearer. Suddenly, a loud explosion echoed in the distance, and the ground shook beneath their feet. Jack glanced over his shoulder to see a cloud of smoke rising into the sky. The enemy had spotted them. "They know we're here," Jack shouted. "Move." They ran, the sound of enemy fire echoing behind them. Jack could see the gates ahead, but they were still too far away. The enemy ships were closing in fast. As they neared the gates, Jack spotted a small vehicle, a transport shuttle station nearby. It was their only chance. "Over there," Jack shouted, pointing to the shuttle. "Get to the shuttle." Groups sprinted toward the shuttle, their steps quick and desperate. Jack could hear the enemy fire growing louder, but they were almost there. They reached the shuttle and climbed inside, and Jack slammed the door shut behind them. The engines roared to life as the shuttle lifted off the ground, and Jack let out a sigh of relief. They had made it, but they weren't safe yet. The enemy would be right behind them. "We're not out of danger," Jack said, his voice tense. "We need to get to the new planet, and we need to do it fast." Amara nodded, her face set with determination. "We'll make it. We have to." As the shuttle soared into the sky, Jack looked out at the dark planet below. They had fought for their survival, and they had made it this far. But the journey was far from over. There were still many challenges ahead, but Jack knew that as long as they stayed together, they would make it. This was only the beginning.